Hey, Michael J.
So, the results from the first Magic Fest Online Weekly Championship are in the books. The virtual books, the pixels. And we have a champion, Sultai Ramp, in the hands of Mark Jacobson.
Dude, Sultai again. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this one last week, and this is like, it's basically the same thing. Like, the main deck is basically the same, right? Like, there's only 3 Nissa Who Shakes the World, but like whatever, right? Like, this is like just the exact same deck as last week.
Yeah, I mean, defining characteristic of this deck, obviously, inclusion of 4 Cavalier of Thorns. Big synergy here. I think that if you, and by you I mean me, just have a Cavalier of Thorns as an anti-Dream Trawler or Dream Trawler answer, that's probably doing it a disservice in a deck that has 4 copies of Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, and 2 copies of Polukranos Unchained, right? So it's got a natural curve coming off of Uro, right? So 3 to 5 to the Cavalier, and then any Cavalier that you get can be dumping Polukranos, can be dumping Uro, or can be fueling either one of those with its binning ability. So, highly synergistic, defining characteristic of this deck, along with 4 Growth Spiral instead of 2.
Yeah, which I know you gotta love.
I think when you say you mean me, but I think anyone just gotta love that. 2 Growth Spiral, 2 Agonizing does not make any sense to me, and I don't believe we have an Agonizing in the 75 on Mark Jacobson's winning deck lists. Nope.
What do you think of the split? 2 Disfigure down and 2 Epic Downfall to go up?
So I think Disfigure and Epic Downfall are there for different matchups, right? So obviously Epic Downfall is very attractive because it only costs 2 mana. But if you think about it, like, Epic Downfall seems awesome against opposing Uros. It can target Uro because Uro has a natural casting cost of 3 regardless of the practical escape cost. And exiling it is very, very powerful, right? So, and then, Disfigure is... And I guess maybe you would Epic Downfall against red decks also, like they've got Torbrand or they've got especially Annex, right? Like exiling Annex is sweet. But you would, I think, only bring in Disfigure against aggro decks. Like, you might bring in Epic Downfall against both aggro and Uro, but Disfigure would only bring it against, like, Fervent Champion type decks.
Yeah, like, Disfigure is really important for those matchups, but Epic Downfall, you can use some of that as well. Whereas you do need some amount of Epic Downfall against stuff like Polukranos and Uro.
Like, I mean, this deck is kind of a wide array of things you'd bring in against aggro. Like, if you're playing against Mono Red, or, like, let's just think about Mono Red for a second. Look,
why not?
Well, I mean, the decks are kind of different, right? Aether Gust,
Good.
Aether Gust, Cry of Carnarium, Disfigure, potentially Epic Downfall, and Ritual of Soot, right? Like, that's also pretty playable against Mono Red. But, I mean, if you're playing, like, against Red Black, I think Cry of the Carnarium has some additional text against Red Black. Get their kitty cats. Like, that's a good example. Like, Epic Downfall, you might want to get a kitty cat with it, but you can't. You can't target it, but you can cry it.
So I take it you like the split between Disfigures and Epic Downfalls.
I think that a deck like this is going to need multiple kinds of tools, and I guess it makes sense. It depends. Like, you probably don't want Casualties of War against Mono Red, for example, right? So you need to bring your curve down. I think it's okay. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I like it. Yeah, I mean, where you draw the specific lines, I don't know. I think it takes more experience, but I don't hate that kind of a split. That seems totally reasonable to me. I think your points about Epic Downfall against these escape creatures it's particularly salient. And Disfigure, you just need to have some speed against some of the faster decks. So that seems fine. I don't know where you're supposed to draw the line specifically, but I could believe that a 2-2 split's good. I was just wondering if you had any experience with that specifically. Yeah.
What do you think? I think there's a little lightness on Thought Distortion here. Thought Distortion seems awesome to me, given the complexion of the metagame, right? It exiles things. So if people have got an Uro or some other sort of resilient threaten their hand, you can get them really good, and obviously it can't be countered. This deck has a pretty decent amount of mana acceleration, so you can kind of get there. What do you think? One Thought Distortion. If you're in the market for Thought Distortion,
I don't hate one. No, I could believe one. You see, the thing going on here is even though Thought Distortion's super, super good, you got to look at it like value over replacement. Like, this deck already, it's not short on things that are really, really good later in the game. Thought Distortion, maybe it's better in certain matchups than Hydroid Krasis would be, but Hydroid Krasis is pretty good too, right?
Well,
and between Casualties of War and Hydroid Krasis and Pelucranos and Nissa Who Shakes the World and Cavalier of Thorns and buying back Uro, this deck's all expensive cards. If you look at the sideboard, it's not surprising to see the sideboard is entirely ways to speed this deck up, with the exception of Vraska and Thought Distortion. There's a very, very limited amount of space for more things that are slow because this deck already has that in spades. Now, it is the case that Thought Distortion is so strong that even though it's not what you're actually looking for, that they're making a concession to it. You know, and when I say it's not what you're looking for, what I mean is that it's not giving you something that you don't already have a strength in.
I think that there is a little bit of a difference between Thought Distortion and a card like Casualties of War. So obviously, both Thought Distortion and Casualties of War are big, expensive, splashy, do a lot of stuff if they resolve kind of things. But if you look at the complexion of the decks that you want to bring them in, even in like the very permission light universe that we're looking at for control type decks in standard right now, most of them can muster an Aether Gust after sideboarding, right? So they can interact with the Casualties of War.
Yeah, but you're still just describing the nuance of which are the best expensive cards, right? Like Hydroid Krasis, like Thought Distortion, goes through counterspells, right? And Uro can be escaped to come back even if they counter it.
Yeah.
The question of, are there spots in which Thought Distortion has advantages? Of course. Thought Distortion is like not a red or a green card. To say nothing of not even just being able to be countered, you know? And it being higher impact in certain matchups. But it's not like Casualties of War isn't a powerful card also.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a Casualties of War in the right spot, usually are generating maybe a 3-for-1 or more, right? Obviously, you rarely get like, you know, the double trifecta or whatever, but the
part here though is, are you actually needing an even better 6-drop? And the answer is generally no, not really. This deck has got unbelievable 6-drops. If you knew what your opponent was going to be, you could tune your deck to be even better. It's not like these 5s and 6s are literally the best against all possible opponents, but they're really good.
Yeah.
You know? Now, having one gives you an extra dimension. It gives you another way so that when the game stalls out, you have another thing you can dig to with your Hydroid Krasis or whatever.
Are you a big fan of Vraska Golgari Queen in this deck?
I don't know about a big fan, but I don't hate one in the sideboard. I've always loved being able to just put this down and hit somebody's Teferi.
Yeah, that -3 is very flexible, and you get to keep a Planeswalker of your own. I'm not in love with this card. A couple of reasons. People have a lot of weird different counterspells that they might have against a controller's deck after sideboarding. Like, I think a Disdainful Stroke. Jacobson himself has got like one Disdainful Stroke in the sideboard. So you can stroke this, you can negate it, you can Aether Gust it. So I feel like a lot of the matchups that you're going to want Vraska Golgari Queen in, they have some sort of way to interact with it. I feel like I'd rather just have something like, you don't bring this in against fast matchups, right? You bring this in to try to grind an advantage, like kind of get a 2-for-1. And I feel like it's unreliable in a lot of those matchups. Like this, I feel like this is just bait for Elspeth Conquers Death, maybe.
Well, I don't know about that. I just want to hit Teferi. But I don't. To me, a lot of the cards in the sideboard look like, yes, that's like a foundational piece. Vraska is not one of them. I would consider this to be one of the most discretionary flex spots. I could believe it if it turned out that this was the best thing in this spot, but I have no reason to believe that it necessarily is beyond the fact that Mark played it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's nearly as attractive as some of the other options, like in terms of like thought distortion or mystical law dispute, or the fourth Aether Gust. By the way, what do you think about this? Everybody always plays 4 Aether Gusts now, and nobody ever plays Noxious Grasp.
Wow. I had not thought about that. I think it's weird because this is itself a black deck, right? I think that the Aether Gusts are played a lot because the cards that you're gusting are often cards like Fires of Invention, right? They're not just going after green permanents like Oko, and I think it's the speed flexibility of Aether Gust and the ability to go after a very wide variety of cards. Besides which, you can Aether Gust cards that aren't...
I mean, Noxious Grasp is pretty fast.
Yeah, but it's not fast against Fires of Invention, right? So I think like you're gusting things like Fires of Invention, like Robber of the Rich. Like I don't know, like when
It sounds like you're just describing red cards instead of white cards. It's fine if that's the answer, but like if people were just playing white weenie instead of red aggro, then you'd want Noxious Grasp, right?
Yeah, and I guess the life would be.
And then Fires of Invention is a red card. If Fires of Invention was a white card, you'd want Noxious Grasp if it was like a thing that could actually be destroyed by it. It doesn't accomplish anything if it's an enchantment, because obviously Noxious Grasp. But I mean, if Noxious Grasp just doesn't have as many good targets, obviously they both hit the green things, right?
So let me just puzzle this out for a second. I think Noxious Grasp, obviously Noxious Grasp was super popular, middle of last year when Oko was in most of the competitive decks, right? So Noxious Grasp is like a very good card, and if you can have a card that can call it terror a key permanent in almost every deck and then get a little bit of upside, you'd want to play it. But at the end of the day, it's basically like a terror, right? It's not that powerful.
It's more like a Hero's Downfall for less with upside.
Yeah, it's like that's exactly I think what it is, but that's not that exciting. I think like
that's pretty exciting.
It's very good, but Aether Gust is very flexible. I think like even beyond the color targeting, Aether Gust is just highly, highly flexible. Because
yeah, you don't have to sell me on why Aether Gust is good. I'm just saying that like all this whole story you're describing, it's not like we're comparing two things that have the same application. They overlap with regards to green.
Yeah.
Red decks are really popular right now. There's Fires of Invention, not even just counting the red aggro deck, there's also Fires of Invention. And even the like blue-green ramp decks will frequently have fire cards as well. And besides, they obviously always have green. They're just who's playing white permanents. There's blue-white. Even against blue-white, where you can hit Teferi, you can't Noxious Grasp somebody's Elspeth who conquers death. You can't Noxious Grasp any of their enchantments that are keeping one of your permanents locked down. So to me, it seems like it's a combination of people are playing, like there's just a lot more high leverage red, like targets that are red, and out of the white targets that are high leverage, too many of them are not actually hit by Noxious Grasp the way that Aether Gust hits the red ones.
I think that there is actually one other thing that makes Aether Gust a little bit more exciting to me than Noxious Grasp, and that's that the card goes not to the graveyard when you ding it. So Aether Gust kind of fundamentally resists the natural ability to grind of some of the cards that it's interacting with. For example, if you Aether Gust Annex, right, they don't get any satyrs out of it.
Yeah, but you're not just grasping.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's just another thing about the card, right? Or you can Aether Gust and
Those are
Uro on a
descriptions,
stack.
but how does it help you? Because like in this spot, it's not like that's the thing that's making you play Noxious Grasp or not. It's just that my question wasn't which one's better. I think Aether Gust is clearly better right now. My question is more from the framework of, is it really right that we always see 0 Noxious Grasps? Like, for instance, do any of these Rakdos sacrifice decks, should any of them be playing Noxious Grasp sometime? Or Esper? Is it sometimes right to play 4 Aether Gusts and 1 Noxious Grasp? Like, I'm questioning why. Is it so stark of a thing that we really expect everybody to play 4 of one and always 0 of the other?
I think that Noxious Grasp is probably underplayed right now. I don't think that... but by extension, I don't think that Aether Gust is overplayed. I think that... It's not even a question of, like, 4 versus 5 or whatever. I think you're right. Like, there's decks that can't play Aether Gust that probably should consider playing Noxious Grasp. And there are decks that play Aether Gust today that should probably also consider playing Noxious Grasp. I think, like, just the ability to target a Teferi is extremely underrated, given how important it is in the format.
Sure. All right. Well, that makes sense.
On that note, of decks that have Ritual of Soot in the sideboard, there's an elegant transition from the winning deck to another.
Nice.
Did you check out Bolin Zhang's 4-color Planeswalker deck? This one is something.
So what do you think, man? Where do you start with this?
So, I've actually I have some experience playing against this player with this deck, and the sense that I got about it when I was playing was that it danced this kind of knife edge of being extremely powerful, but extremely powerful in ways that I maybe hadn't prepared for, and then also unpredictable. So there are, like, key one-ofs, or, like, just not 3 or 4 ofs that, like, you can just win with, and they're in weird places, right? Like, there's one Command the Dreadhorde in the sideboard, right? This set can obviously just steal the win with Elder Spell, but there's only one. The other thing is, I think that, like, the average player right now with the average net deck is going to be maybe not ill-prepared or wholly unprepared, but, like, not as well prepared for the threats that are in Bolin Zhang's deck than they might be for the threats in, say, Mono Red or Bant, right? Like,
sort of. I mean, a lot of these threats are pretty normal, like Teferi and Narset, right?
Yeah, but
if you're talking about specifically Nicol Bolas, because Elspeth the Conqueror's Death is pretty popular, and even Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, is not exactly a thing to be prepared for.
So the thing that I'm thinking is, like, Nicol Bolas is an extremely powerful card at 5 mana relative to other cards that you could be playing in Standard for about 5 mana, and it is dangerous when combined with Elspeth Conqueror's Death, because this card's pretty hard to get off the battlefield, right? It's got 4 loyalty to start, and then it has a ferocious +1 that can often just defend it from whatever the threat is that could potentially be getting it. And then, you can chain Nicol Bolas into Elspeth Conqueror's Death, or you can follow it up with Liliana, Dreadhorde General, which I think Liliana is also an unspeakably powerful card. And you're often in a situation where you're like, all right, I need to remove a black Planeswalker, and I don't necessarily have the ability to remove 2 black Planeswalkers. Neither one of them can get you. And these are both serious get you Planeswalkers. They're not nice ones like Narset or Teferi that are just like, oh, I got a pretty good advantage for a few turns, but now I have this state-based effect. These ones have legitimate I can win text at the bottom of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. So this is an Esper deck splashing for Nicol Bolas, which I personally love.
Yeah.
But having the twin pillars at 5 of both Elspeth and Nicol Bolas, that's it's going to be hard to beat this deck with regards to raw power. I mean, this is a deck that it's like, what are the most powerful things we can do on turn 3? I don't know, play Teferi or Narset.
Yeah.
What are the most powerful things we can do on turn 4? I don't know. Atris is pretty good. I don't know that it's the best in the entire format, but that one's pretty good. At 5, Nico Bolas and Elspeth. That's pretty good. Liliana at 6. I can believe it. This is the fact that you're just clearing the way with 7 discard spells too. One of the things that's interesting about this deck is there's no spot removal. Right? Like there's 2 Cry of the Carnariums, and then there's 3 Oath of Nissa that are sort of that. But like that's how this deck makes room for all this action, right?
Yeah, so this deck is, I guess, very pointed towards the kind of a metagame where Azorius or Bant or Sultai are the decks that you'd be playing against, which are like, I'm going to play a limited number of extremely powerful threats that might or might not be creatures, and those decks all make concessions to cards like, Disfigure or Shatter the Sky or Glass Casket. This deck just takes all those spots that they're doing that with and then says, hey, I'm going to play a card that's, similar speed and power level to your card, but mine are designed to fight against your type of threats instead of designed to fight against, a bear. I don't know. You can defend yourself with, like, Atris. It can block. I guess you have Cry. I mean, Oath of Time.
Atris is not the most reliable blocker.
No, but but like, you see what I'm saying, Patrick? Like, this deck is just aimed at a different part of the metagame, and I think it's
totally
because those are the good decks. So,
I love the lack of spot removal in this deck. I love that. Besides, it's not like you can't deal with the permanents. I mean, outside of the powerful blocking abilities of Atris, Teferi, Liliana, Nico Bolas, they've got action on the way in, and Elspeth Conquers Death and Oath of Kaya, of course.
Yeah, so I think like this is relying on kind of a texture of a metagame where people are playing like one big thing per turn instead of playing like multiple things that are going wide that are above 2 toughness, let's say. Right? I think that's the bet here. When I played against this deck before, I actually thought that an underplayed card that I got from Sam Black, actually, that I found to be pretty successful against this kind of a strategy would be like Dawn of Hope, which is a card that can both deploy threats and generate card advantage that gets under the extraordinarily powerful permanents that are played by this deck. So it's just interesting. If this deck kind of rises in terms of popularity, the sorts of decks that we've been talking a lot about, which are kind of Growth Spiral, Uro, tell me what the next big thing you're doing is, I think are at a disadvantage relative to Nico Bolas and Liliana, which can so profitably interact with those single big threat per turn type decks.
That seems reasonable. I can believe that. I think that's a good way of looking at it too. Like I think you're right. Like if that's where you believe the metagame's at. So what else do you think is like? What are the other decks that really jumped out to you? Because a lot of the decks here we saw were pretty, stuff we've seen a lot of. Like the Bant Ramp and the Rakdos Sacrifice.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is worth talking about is there were 2 Rakdos Sacrifice decks in the top 8. Ainul Alcaraz finished second, and then there was another one in the top 8 played by Ashley Munoz Preaces. And even though these decks are both labeled Rakdos Sacrifice, they're actually very different. And we talked a bit last week and previous weeks about whether or not you would play the card
Redwood Butcher.
No, well, I guess you could pick your pile, right? I was going to say Crocs, a Titan of Death's Hunger. And, one of these decks has got 4 Crocs, a Titan of Death's Hunger. The other one has 0. The other one has 4 Dreadhorde Butcher, and the other one has 0, right? So I think, like, it's just, like, if you're going to play Croxa, like, Ainul's deck has Croxa and then 4 copies of Timurit Calls the Dead, right? So Timurit Calls the Dead is a very slow card relative to some of the other cards that you might play in a Rakdos Sacrifice deck. And then if you look at Ashley's deck, Ashley has like not just 4 Dreadhorde Butcher, but 3 Gutterbones that are not present in Einol's deck, and 2 Robber the Rich. So we saw some Robber the Rich action last week. So it's like one of them is a beatdown deck and one of them is a mid-range deck. Is that fair, even though they both have a similar engine?
Is Slaughter Priest of Mogies really what you think of as the mid-range, the distinguishing characteristic of the mid-range build?
That's weird, right? Like that's a damage card.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know that it's so clear of a distinction between those two.
Actually, tell me about...
I think it really just comes down to philosophically, do you believe in Kroxa or not? Because Timuret Calls the Dead is subsidizing Kroxa. It's like there because it's giving you more Kroxa equity. Versus the Dreadhorde Butcher doesn't ask anything of you the way Kroxa does. Dreadhorde Butcher is just straight up, shows up, does his job. And Gutterbones and Robber of the Rich, I don't think that it's about them being aggro. They have some aggro components. I think it is about them being straightforward and not necessarily needing the synergy the same way. Whereas the Kroxa build, there's a lot more you're aspiring to do something bigger and you're willing to do some setup first.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so actually, let's talk about Slaughter Priest of Mogies for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a deck with a bunch of sacrifice, so just an underrated synergy in a deck that would play Timuret Calls the Dead is that Chapter 3, you actually sacrifice it. So there's an additional trigger there for Mayhem Devil or Slaughter Priest. But, like, I don't even know if I would want Slaughter Priest in my 75. This deck only has 2 Midnight Reapers and 2 Woe Striders. Like, if I'm going to... And I guess the argument can be made that this is a 2-drop instead of a 3-drop in a deck that's also got 4 copies of Timuret Calls the Dead. But I'm not sure that I'd rather have this than any of Dreadhorde Butcher, Robber of the Rich, or Gutterbones. Or something else.
Part of what's going on here is the having additional sack outlets for your Claim the Firstborn. So, like, when you have Slaughter Priest of Mogies, you can steal people's stuff and sack it to your priest, right?
Yeah, I guess that's it. It's kind of an expensive way to do it, but I guess you're right.
And then the other one is just Slaughter Priest of... So, well, I just mean, like, if the game stalls out, Slaughter Priest of Mogies, despite how aggressive it can be, it gives you this angle of how you can try to set something up that's powerful. Versus, obviously, like, Gutterbones is not trying to set up something powerful.
No.
It's modest and reliable. Slaughter Priest of Mogies is trying to set up something powerful. It's more volatility. You know? Like, that's the trade-off that's going on here, I think.
Yeah, one of the things I thought to be really an interesting contrast between these two decks is you would think that the deck with Kroxa and Timuret Calls the Dead, which is the slower version, would be the more card advantageous version, but all of Dreadhorde Butcher, Gutterbones, and Robber the Rich are self-contained sources, at least potentially, of card advantage.
Yeah, I don't know that this other deck is really a card advantage deck. I think it's a big plays deck, you know? Like, it's a lot more of a combo-y ramp sort of thing. Like, you're doing something powerful, and you're trying to set it up. You're not really grinding out any advantage, though. Like, you're just trying to win.
What do you think about any of those? Oh, actually, there's some Noxious Grasps in one of these sideboards.
There you go.
Ashley's
there you go.
Noxious Grasp. What do you think about any of these other sideboards? Like Farika's Libation. That's a.
I don't know. I'm not that scared of Dream Trawler.
No. All right. Tibalt.
I do like Red Cap Melee, though.
I guess Red Cap Melee is, you could potentially get a combo off of it also. And I like Rotting Regisaur. That's a hot one.
Yeah, of course. You got to hit hard. Yeah, I don't know. These Rakdos decks still don't do it for me.
No.
Nah, but whatever. It's fine. I'm sure they're fine.
I mean, they're performing, right? There were 2 in the top 8, 1 in the finals.
Is Bedevil really what you want?
It
Maybe it's
seems
fine.
it's funny because you've historically loved like a hero's downfall, right? And
Only when it was right.
yeah. All right, a bedevil is like a hero's downfall that can also, require a red mana. It's a
Yeah, since it's totally right to play black-red in this format,
I mean, a 3 casting cost 1-for-1 removal card with no particular upside but its flexibility is not the most exciting thing in the world to me when the deck that I think is the best has cards like Uro, Dream Trawler, and Hydroid Crisis. All of which kind of like, oh, a 3 casting cost 1-for-1? How cute!
a good example is Swords to Plowshares and Necrotal way back in the day.
Yeah.
You see, Swords to Plowshares is unbelievably powerful, right? Like, as far as spot removal goes, there are very few cards in the game's history that are even in the conversation with Swords to Plowshares. However, there were times in which Swords to Plowshares wasn't even right to play in some decks that could, when the only creatures people were playing were things like Necrotals and Uktabi Orangutans and Mana Wars, where that's just not the right way to be engaging with them, And I think that Bedevil, well, it would be unbelievable in a lot of formats. The kinds of threats that are played right now don't seem to lend themselves to being killed by a 3-cost flexible removal spell.
I mean, I feel like they can generally be killed. It's just you're so far. I think you're just so far behind.
Efficiently. I meant officially, yeah.
Like if you're just playing a guy and somebody's necrotalling you, they're getting a 2-for-1 on the necrotal, and then you're just kind of doubling down on that by plowing it, right? That's the kind of the similar situation, except this time you're plowing it for 3 mana instead of 1.
Yeah.
The Bant Ramp decks in this top 8 had security blankets in both. So there was a second copy of Dream Trawler in both of those. I got to tell you, Patrick, I like it. And one of those people was Pro Tour champion Ivan Floch.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it seems good for this week.
So not a lot of groundbreaking technology in these Bant decks. We have talked a lot about Bant.
Dude, what about the Azorius deck? Did you see this deck from the top 32?
Which one is it?
It's like a Karesh. This Azorius Blink deck that's like it's a 4 Charming Prince, 3 Thassa's Deep Dwelling. To blink, plus you have Time Wipe to do more blinking.
Yeah, so this strategy is potentially really powerful, right? So it's got Thassa Deep Dwelling, which obviously, like you said, can blink. And when you're blinking cards like Agent of Treachery, then you're getting a nice return on that agent, right? Agent doesn't give the card back when it blinks. You get to keep it. So if you get the blink going, you actually might put yourself in a situation where at the beginning of your end step, you actually control 3 or more permanents the other person has. Every creature in this deck, from the lowly Fibblethip the Lost at 2 to Agent of Treachery up at 7, has got some kind of sweet 187 effects, right?
Yeah, with the exception of Thassa, who blinks other people's 187 effects.
Fair enough. Do you know what card is missing, woefully missing in this strategy, which I think would be sweet, at least in the sideboard?
What?
Gideon. So if you could make something indestructible of your own, then when you Cavalier of Dawned it, you could destroy your own permanent and then get a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature and keep the original permanent. What about that, Patrick? That's a good reason to have Gideon in this deck.
Busted.
Because deck doesn't have enough card advantage.
Okay, alternatively, what if instead of a Cavalier of Dawn, we cut the Cavalier of Dawn and put a 4th Elspeth Conquers Death in the deck?
Wow. Wait, hold on a second, Patrick. This is crazy talk. Cavalier of Dawn costs 5. Elspeth Conquers Death costs 5. And... wait, hold on a second. Elspeth Conquers Death is also a more reliable way to destroy one of the opponent's permanents. This is, I don't know. It's starting to break my AI here. I don't know why there's one Cavalier of Dawn and only 3 Elspeth Conquers Death.
Yep, there we go.
We improved the deck.
That's my contribution.
I gotta say, I'm not normally a fan of Elite Guard Mage. I have been noted to call it in the past not Elite Guard Mage, but it's actually very good in this strategy, right?
It looks pretty good in this deck.
It's really good here. Like, this deck just wants to draw more lands so that it can get up to its 5 drops and 7 drops or whatever, and like, I don't know, man. If I was some kind of beatdown deck, Elite Guard Mage into Charming Prince, which seems like a funny backwards curve, seems like I would never beat that, right? Just Charming Prince your Elite Guard Mage. Or you could go like Elite Guard Mage first, gain 3 life, block. Charming Prince first, gain 3 life, block, and then go into Elite Guard Mage, gain 3 more life. That's a disaster for beatdown decks. I mean, like, you can go like Charming Prince to Fairy, Elite Guard Mage. This is miserable to play against with beatdown, and I think also miserable to play against with like the not super overpowered kind of card advantage grindy decks, right? Like other decks that are gaining like a small to medium advantage with each card per turn, because like almost every card in this deck is generating an advantage in and of itself, and then when combined with Thassa and Elspeth Conquers Death, you're just like tripling down on the card advantage.
I don't know. Yeah, totally. But if you're playing, you're telling me that if you're playing a fast aggro deck, you're actually scared to play against this deck?
I think that
this deck looks so slow. It's not just that this deck has 3 7 drops and like oodles of 5 drops. It's not like Thassa Deep Dwelling is like the greatest at defending yourself either.
No.
So like this deck comes down, does nothing on turn 1, and its big defensive plans are Fibble Thip and Charming Prince, both of which can easily be gone over the top of. And it's not like this deck is loaded on 3s that can defend you well. Deputy of Detention can easily get beat with value for 3. And Teferi is obviously fantastic, but it's not like they aren't already built understanding that Teferi exists.
Yeah, I mean, Teferi is just an undercosted into the Royal.
I would run over this deck. I think that the sideboarding is the only spot where this deck's got a chance, which is why there's 4 Devout Decree and 4 Aether Gust.
Well, hold on. And a Heliod's Intervention, right?
Yeah.
So the Heliod's Intervention is deceptively important against aggro, I think, right? Like, this card, obviously, if you've got a bazillion spare mana, you can gain twice X life, but it's an instant speed card that can destroy Embercleave, right? So it can destroy Embercleave. It could potentially destroy multiple Witch's Ovens in the other aggro matchup. Well, I don't even know if we're calling that an aggro matchup, but
yeah, I know what you mean, though.
But it can do it, right? And I think that that's probably going to come in that matchup. But you're right. I think like Gusts and Decrees are coming in whenever the colors are right. I don't know. This deck is a very, very excellent tuning sideboard, but it is not a powerful sideboard, right? Like, other decks have got these cards that the sideboard has got like some ace that you're like, oh man, if that happens.
This is not that. No, this is definitely just a couple concessions to some glaring weaknesses because of the unusual way the main deck is configured.
This is like 14 Mystical Disputes, basically, 1 Heliod's Intervention.
Yep, that is what this is. It's a bunch of really cheap cards to try to regain some of the tempo because of how glacially slow of a 2-for-1 deck you are in the main deck. As far as card advantage goes, what do you think of the Teamer Adventure deck? How sexy is that? Like the Renato Blade?
I mean, I'm
in the top 32.
I'm a big fan of Teamer Adventures. If you're, I always put the caveat, which is like, if you've got like unlimited mental energy and also unlimited time, Teamer Adventures is the deck to play. But if you don't have unlimited time and unlimited mental energy, I'm a Bant guy. But I mean, I think Teamer Adventures just buries people most of the time, and when they win, and doesn't win very many close games. But if you let any of their stuff go, right? Like if you give them 2 turns with an Edgewall Innkeeper in play, or with a Lucky Clover in play, you're going to be woefully behind in any game that's actually about card advantage, right? Like, nobody keeps up with them on a card advantage basis. Like, Bant beats this deck because Dream Trawler just goes over their flying defense. Aggro has to go under their card advantage. But if you're like, all right, we're gonna play a classic game of Magic where the guy who draws 2 to 3 cards per turn versus the guy who draws 1 card per turn is going to win, this deck is highly favored in any game where that's kind of like the way the table is set.
So talk to me about Once and Future.
Once and Future is, I think, a concession to the fact that the deck sideboard is largely, not largely, it's just all just one Aether Gust, one Claim the Firstborn, etc., but that you can get multiple sideboard cards simultaneously with Granted and Lucky Clover at the same time. So let's say you like really want to get, multiple permission spells. You might go like Once in Future and Aether Gust. And then so you gust them, and then you can Once in Future it back, and then potentially also get something else from your graveyard that you wanted to get back. I think that's a big part of it. Also, this deck isn't very good at covering its spells. So if you've got like a single surgical card, like, like an Expansion Explosion, something like that somebody might counter, and then, this Expansion Explosion was supposed to generate a ton of card advantage, but it doesn't because it got countered. The Once in Future can give you another swing at that when you don't have any additional cardboard that has that name.
Sure, I could believe that. What about Shadow Spear?
2-for-1. Shadow Spear.
Is Shadow Spear just about Dream Trawler equity?
No, it's terrible against Dream Trawler. You just do all your work and they discard another card and give it hexproof again. That works out very rarely. I think Shadow Spear is actually
you just pay 1, right? Permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn?
Yeah, but you have to pay 1 and do something, right? So, like, if you've got...
Yeah, I just mean you get to spend 1 mana. You don't have, them discarding cards doesn't help.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the situation that you're in, right? Like, but you might not have more mana than they have spare cards to discard. I mean, that's certainly...
No. I'm saying you don't need to have more mana. It's not targeting. You just spend 1 mana.
But you have to have something that targets the Dream Trawler. That's what I'm saying, right? So
right.
You're doing...
Okay, so let's walk through this. Let's say the person with Dream Trawler has 7 cards in hand.
Yeah.
I have a Shadow Spear in play and 1 kill spell.
But which spell is it? It's probably just a Brazen Borrower, right? Like, what do you like? You don't have a lot of...
Why is my...
Because that's what the deck has. Like, the deck doesn't... Like, you can't...
Oh, you're saying... I'm like mass manipulation.
Okay, I mean...
Or Domri's Ambush.
So
I hear you, though, because there's just not that many removal spells in this deck.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are real expensive. That's
fair. Yeah. No, I feel you. That's a good point. So, like, you get to make them not hexproof anymore, but man, is that a tough way to do it when your deck has so few removal spells.
So I think that Shadow Spear's primary thing that it does is one of them is you just make Lovestruck Beast into, a Stream of Life, right? You're just like, get in for 6. They probably like triple block it or whatever. And then that just puts you far enough ahead that you probably don't just lose to whatever they had in the early game. But the other thing that's really good about it is it gives Beanstalk Giant trample. So Beanstalk Giant is like enormous. It'd be like 9/9 or something, but people can be holding it off with like a 1/1 token. But you just give it trample and then you just win real quick with it. So I think that obviously a lot of these cards in a tutor sideboard have multiple potential applications, but I think it's more to me about giving Beanstalk Giant trample or Lovestruck Beast lifelink than it is about getting Dream Trawler.
Okay.
But it can do all those things. The cutest thing that this deck can do is if you Granted with a Lucky Clover in play and you've got a Beanstalk Giant, you can get Fling and Expansion Explosion, and then you just 20 them. It's like Fling my Beanstalk Giant, Double it up. Let's go.
That is pretty cute.
That's the cutie.
That's fine. And then obviously Grafdigger's Cage here stops the escape, like Kroxa or Uro or anything like that, right? Like if you play against the Cauldron Familiar Kroxa stuff, Grafdigger's Cage is great there. And if you play against Uro and Polukranos, Grafdigger's Cage is pretty good there too.
Yeah, they're at least buying you time. Oftentimes those decks have got some solution to Grafdigger's Cage, right? Like, this is an expensive way to do it, but, they've got Casualties of War, or they could potentially have, Night of Autumn, depending on which deck they are. So it's not a permanent solution necessarily. They can even, the Bant deck can bounce it with Teferi and then escape that turn, and then you get them back, but they got the value they wanted. It's still doing something. I'm not a huge fan of that card myself. I think that if I played this deck, I would just play like way more Aether Gusts and just be very happy to double granted for multiple Aether Gusts in a lot of matchups instead of some of those. Like, is it so bad to have just like 4 Aether Gusts in your sideboard and like not like Claim the Firstborn is kind of a weird card to have in this sideboard. Like, this deck is so powerful. Like, it doesn't get very much out of like an undercosted threaten that has a very limited targeting capability. Right? That's very different of a one-of than like Expansion Explosion, which can combo with Fling or be like, all right, I'm out.
Well, it Claim the Firstborn combos with Fling.
Yeah.
That's part of the combo, is you take their Uro, hit them with it, draw the card, get the life, and then you fling it.
Yeah. That's true. I think like for a deck with this much mana, and having access to cards like Nissa Who Shakes the World and Escape to the Wilds, maybe you can afford a real threaten. I don't know. Like, I just think
I like
threaten is not doing it.
They're doing it on the cheap, so that when you have just I don't know. It's a great combo to get, right? Like when you have 7. I don't know. Sometimes you just already got it. You're like, okay, I got 7 mana. I'm going to spend 4. I got the Clover. And now with the 3, the things that go get are the Claim the Firstborn and the Fling. It's kind of fancy, but I don't hate it. Sometimes you got to get just fancy on them.
What do you think about the Red Cap Melee? Like, that card also seems super... Like, it's weirdly narrow for a deck like this. This deck is 3 colors. It doesn't need a way to deal 4 specifically, to a red card. Like, it's...
So I like Red Cap Melee in general, but I don't think I need it that much in this deck. I like it better in like the Rakdos deck, where it's just like kind of efficient and is a good tactical tool. Here, I think that I guess it's possible that that's just the card you really want to go get a bunch. I could believe it, but yes, it doesn't jump out to me as being nearly as attractive as a lot of these other options.
But I do love Teamer Adventures. I think it's one of the best decks in the format. I enjoy playing it. It's also surprisingly great against aggro. Like, you just have these draws sometimes where you're just like, oh, I drew a Lovestruck Beast. Probably going to win. Especially if you're like Lucky Clover into Heart's Desire. That's so hard to beat for some beatdown decks. They're just like, here's 2 1/1s that are going to soak up the damage. Now here's a 5/5. And it's not like those cards are like all permanent problems for them. Like, everybody knows that those cards exist in the format. They can deal with it. It's just like they buy so much time for a deck that if you let it go, like, it's just going to blow you away. Like, Lucky Clover into Beanstalk Giant frontside, Fertile Footsteps is literally 5 mana on turn 4. It's extraordinarily powerful in a deck that has Nissa and Escape to the Wilds.
Yep. Well, all right, man. I guess the Grand Prix circuit is underway. Man, are they doing this every week now?
I don't know. I was really excited last week, but
until the next time they change things.
What would you play if you were in the case that you were going to try to qualify for one of these? What deck would you go for?
Well, my head is saying still Bant.
Yeah.
but my heart is saying Nico Bolas Esper.
Yeah, I mean that Nico Bolas deck. I feel like that's a tournament spiker, right? Like it might not be the best deck, but the way the soldiers are lined up, right? You only need one arrow to get two guys in a row. That's the way I'm looking at that deck.
If Nico Bolas is wrong, I don't want to be right.
You still want to be right.
I want to be on Nico Bolas's team. I think that is by definition right.
Yeah. All right. I can buy that. Well, we'll see who's winning this week. It'll be exciting to find out.
All right. See you next week. Bye.
In life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left